My name is Camelia Dicu, and I have been teaching English for Constantin Brâncuși University for almost 25 years. Of course, this is not a very pleasurable situation for me to speak from the TV with you, my dear students, because I already miss you. I hope you miss me too. But the course today, which we should have had yesterday, it is about the beginnings, American Promised Land on the one hand, American literature, and of course three major American writers, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, Mark Twain. So, the course today is part of the bigger course, let's say, of the semester called English Literature 6, and the aims, you, dear students, by the end of the course, will be able to recognize historical facts in both the Irish and American histories, recognize the authors in the Irish and American literature, comment upon different texts belonging to these authors. The aims for the present course, for the present lesson, subject matter, you, dear students, by the end of the current presentation, will be able to recognize important facts in the American history, recognize the most important early American writers, comment upon literary fragments by making use of adequate critical devices. We shall begin by telling you once more what are the issues we are going to examine, to explore today, namely the beginnings, myth of America, the Promised Land, and I thought about this title a lot before this presentation, because in this epoch, or better said, in these moments, when our existence is marked by COVID-19, I shall be talking about the myth of America, the Promised Land. But here I am. The second topic, the beginnings of the American literature. Third, three major American writers. Under this title, Myth of America, the Promised Land, I'm going to explore the very beginning of American nation, what we call now the United States of America. The question arising here is, how did everything begin? What was the sparkle which gave birth to a powerful nation? Nonetheless, the sparkle, or better said sparkles, there were two. And therefore, another two questions arise here. One, had Martin Luther known the profound changes in terms of political, economic, and social areas his Protestant Reformation had brought, would he have posted his 95 Theses on the door of the Castle Church, Wittenberg, Germany? Second, had John Calvin known the implications of the doctrine, would he have furthered the doctrine of predestination? For the beginning, we have to tell that the arrival of the Puritans by the ship Mayflower on the American shore in 1620, with its 102 passengers, signifies the beginning of modern America. They were not first, however. The French, the Dutch, and the Spaniards claimed parts of American continent, while the non-Puritan colony Jamestown was established in 1607. What you see in the right-hand corner of the screen, it is a stamp depicting Mayflower on a 1920 US postage stamp. The question arising here, and you know my style of teaching that I use during my courses, is based upon questions. They are inquiry. There is an inquiry which you, dear students, should answer the questions, and together we are teaching the course, that lesson. The question arising, another question of course, who were the Puritans? They were English Protestants who followed the reforming ideas of Martin Luther and John Calvin. But who were they? Martin Luther, who lived in between 1483-1546, was a German theologian and religious reformer who was the catalyst of the 16th century Protestant Reformation. Despite his father's desire for him to become a lawyer, a violent thunderstorm apparently made him steer towards the monastic life. And as a matter of fact, this is the sparkle that was the beginning of all that followed. That violent thunderstorm. What made him write those 95 theses which he posted on the door of Castle Church in Wittenberg were due to the lack of spirituality he found on a visit to Rome, as well as the indulgences controversy. And they were the cause of the 95 theses. Another question yet, what are these indulgences? What were those indulgences? They were pieces of papers, they were kind of letters signed and stamped by the Pope himself, which a Dominican monk sold. And of course, instead of this piece of paper, that who purchased that piece of paper obtained pardon for his sins. Well, these indulgences constituted angered Mr. Martin Luther, and that's why he wrote those 95 theses. On the other hand, another reformer, John Calvin, 1509-1564, was a French Renaissance humanist, theologian, and ecclesiastical statesman. He was the leading French reformer and the most important figure in the second generation of the Protestant Reformation. He embraced the doctrine of utilitarianism. Now, another question, of course, what is utilitarianism? It is an ethical theory determining right from wrong on the account of the outcomes, meaning that it is advisable for our life, morally speaking, to be happy and pleasant to the detriment of pain and unhappiness. Now, going on with our course, with our lesson, similar to Luther and their precursor Thomas d'Aquinas, believed in the doctrine of predestination and salvation. In short, predestination and salvation became cornerstones of the newcomers' ontology, attempting throughout their existence to earn salvation. Interestingly, the doctrine made the Puritans proud of being part of God's enterprise, in which good deeds are rewarded while the bad ones punished. Therefore, the elect will show earthly signs of their special roles, namely that they will be both pious and successful in business. So the members of the Puritan community strove to obtain piety and prosperity. Even more interesting, this is the source of Puritan ethics, which deeply influenced the American moral code, yet reducing the importance of man's behavior to nil. Nil meaning nothing. Consequently, the desideratum to be among the elected ones forced the American to be at his best all the time, for fear of admitting or having his neighbors ascertain his failure of gaining a place among God's chosen ones. Succeeding in his life has become the feature of the American culture and the predominant theme, topic, subject matter in American literature ever since. On the other hand, the Puritans' sense of being God's great design, they also had to make sure that nothing distorts the words in the Christian scripture. Therefore, in the latter half of the 16th century, they began their mission to purify the Church of England of all changes and additions. The undertaking of purification earned them their name, Puritanism. So now you know where from this denomination Puritanism come from. Yet, this purification undertaking made them enemies of the state. The Elizabethan settlement in 1559, accepting a compromise between Protestant and Roman Catholic, was unacceptable for the Puritans, which culminated with an open warfare in 1642, beheading of King Charles I and the rule of Oliver Cromwell. While involved in a controversy with the state, the Puritans, having reached on the American shore, believed returning to the original lessons of the scripture can be beneficial. By imitating Calvin's systems, they substituted the hierarchy of clergy from pope to parish priests with a hierarchy of ruling bodies from National Assembly to the Council of Elders in parish church, yet maintaining pyramidal model. Who were the settlers on the American continent? Who were the Congregationalists? So, here are another two questions going on our inquiry. There was a small group called Congregationalists who, though endorsing the doctrine of predestination, they differed from the rest of Puritans called Presbyterians in their ideas regarding the church organization and membership. What was a covenant? Another question. Well, this covenant referred to the membership of the church, Presbyterian or Congregationalist, but the member should pay for his membership a fee. So this is the covenant. Interestingly, each of these churches was independent on matters of administration, faith, and each founded on a separate covenant, meaning each of them had to pay fee for the membership of the church. For the Puritan Congregationalists, it came to be the covenant of redemption, denoting these churches were directly related to God, yet they offered church membership. God's blessing only to those who had the power to make a public confession of their faith, conversion, and swear to the covenant. They were visible saints. The Congregationalists, as the most exacting of the Puritans, contradicted the political goals of the Puritan movement. Consequently, the double pressure, Presbyterian and government, led to persecution, and some of the group Congregationalists chose to leave the country for Netherlands. Yet, in 1620, a group decided to go from there to America. Of the 102 passengers on board of Mayflower, only 1/3 were visible saints. On arrival, all of them yet signed Mayflower Compact, establishing their life in Plymouth Plantation. Later, the Mayflower settlers were called Pilgrims or Forefathers, and they still honored, a lot by the present Americans. After Mayflower, other groups of settlers came, so the Puritan colonization of New England became a fact. Although the arrival of Mayflower to America and the establishing of the Forefathers was a result of fleeing from persecution, intolerance, and domination of political enemies, John Winthrop's group, coming from Arabella, and the subsequent ones embarked on a journey toward the land not yet dominated by hostile faction, new economic possibilities, but also to the New World in its original and religious sense. Now, would you please pay a little attention to the following words? So, John Winthrop's group and the subsequent ones embarked on a journey toward the land not yet dominated by hostile factor, new economic possibilities, namely to the New World in its original and religious sense, meaning that they were the first inhabitants. They thought they were the first. Also, although they were not, because they found there the Indian Americans, how they are called today, and they made them flee from their native lands. But this is, let's say, the conception, the idea, which was planted from early times, from youth to all the Americans. This is the myth of America, in other words. The myth of America as the promised land has become crucial for understanding both early migration and the numerous literary creation. Therefore, the Puritans are now cast in the role of the chosen people, entailing, however, special and grave responsibility. Despite their hope for the New World, the settlers met difficult living conditions in the unreliable climate, Indian wars, or the colonists' lack of experience. Their best defense were will, faith, and self-discipline. Therefore, among the specific national American features, there are the urge to succeed and exceed, the belief that hard work is a necessary ingredient for happiness, the cult of money, as well as the conviction that they are the chosen people. Okay. As a nation at the beginning of its existence, speaking of the literary legacy of the 17th and 18th century, it was limited enough, meaning that anything written in those centuries cannot be called literature. The delayed beginnings is one reason. On the other hand, the Puritans believed that reading could divert people's attention from hard working. This could be the reasons accounting for the lack of novels writing. Well, this is an excuse, to be honest. Bearing in mind that they were English people who left England, United Kingdom nowadays, for the new world, namely America. And also bearing in mind that there was some literature, and we know some of what was written until that time. They could not write anything similar to what had been so far. Nevertheless, poetry did not encounter the same ideological opposition. Three poets deserve attention, well, not exactly, but they should be remembered for the sake of the course of the literary history. Namely, Anne Bradstreet, Michael Wigglesworth, and Edward Taylor. Now, let's see what they wrote that they became so important. Interestingly, despite not being great literature lovers, the new settlers, appreciated knowledge and education. This period is noteworthy for the foundation and the beginning of the most important American universities. That is, Harvard College back then in 1636, so it is old, followed by William and Mary, Yale, Princeton, Pennsylvania, Columbia, Dartmouth, and Brown. Yet, we should remember that Cambridge and Oxford were founded somewhere in the 12th or 13th century, so they are much older than this Harvard College. William Wigglesworth was one of the first graduates of Harvard. He came to be a public figure, and later he was offered the presidency of Harvard. President of a faculty of a university, it is something similar like for us, rector. But he declined. Wigglesworth became popular among his fellow Puritans through the Day of Doom or Day of Judgment, published in 1622. It became the first American bestseller, but you should not think of Dan Brown's book. It was designated a bestseller for those times because it expressed, let's say, the thoughts, the ideas of those days, because for our contemporary reader, it could seem cruel, although not for the original readers. The explanation is in the poem itself, and it lies in that the one who is prepared for the end have nothing to worry about. as the readers of Wigglesworth considered themselves righteous, they did not fear of the day of judgment. He was widely read because his poem expressed the spirit of those times, influenced by Puritans' conceptions. Another important name for the development of American culture, although only speaking of the, let's say, bridge created between that period and the period of more literary, let's say, enlightenment. So, Edward Taylor. He is particularly noteworthy not because of contemporary fame, like Wigglesworth, but because of the discovery of the manuscript in the Yale Library in 1937. His editor, Donald A. Stanford, said about him he was the last important representative of metaphysical school due to his poetry full of conceits and literary talent beyond any doubt. Yet he did not consider his poetry Puritan, and for this reason he did not agree to publish any during his lifetime. So if we calculate, there is something like 300 years, 200 years and some between writing those poems and publication and their discovery in the Yale Library. Nonetheless, Taylor was known for writing elaborate sermons during his life that became a form of art written for sophisticated audience, referring to sermons. In other words, writing sermons and reading sermons before the fellow Puritan American became the form of art performed perfectly conscious of their values in those times. So, sermons represented a form of literature for those times. Those who dealt with the undertaking may have been a little more educated than their fellow colonists. The role of sermons was primarily to arouse the religious feelings. Yet another role, and we know, is part of the political process of the colonies. Apart from sermons, there were diaries and chronicles regarding the sense of the 17th century America. While the European chroniclers provided overpraising the sovereign, the American ones tended to describe the earthly in terms of eternal. Among these chroniclers, William Bradford, one of the two leaders of Plymouth plantation and governor, whose chronicle provides the author's conviction that America had been chosen as the place for a very special experiment in man's spiritual history, and that evil in the man can bring this experiment to ruin. Another chronicler was Cotton Mather, who, in Magnalia Christi Americana, collected stories, narratives, and testimonies meant to prove America's special place in God's design. Others were Edward Johnson and Jonathan Edwards, whose importance was that they were stages announcing the emergence of Benjamin Franklin. In short, the role of the writers, the so-called writers, reminded previously, was only to record, to register the events, the facts, the living in those early times on the American continent. But they all prepared, let's say, the emergence of Benjamin Franklin. Who was Benjamin Franklin. And what did he accomplish? He was the American who best embodied the desideratum to succeed and exceed, the belief that hard work is a necessary ingredient for happiness, yet applying rational thinking to explain laws of nature rather than God's design. Franklin was a gifted scientist, astute businessman, and later political wisdom characterized him. Nonetheless, because the colonies differed in their religious inclinations as a result of the different waves of settlers, New England was predominantly Puritan, while Pennsylvania was primarily Quaker. Franklin's temperament suited with the latter better. Who are the Quakers? Quaker means the society of religious people. Franklin embraced the unorthodox religious attitude, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, of deism, which referred to natural religion, the acceptance of a certain body of religious knowledge that is inborn in every person or that can be acquired by the use of reason and the rejection of religious knowledge when it is acquired through either revelation of the teaching of any church. What are the important accomplishments of Benjamin Franklin? And you can see at the title, From Rags to Riches, which also belong to Benjamin Franklin. So, which are these more important accomplishments? First of all, in 1725, he wrote the essay A Dissemination on Liberty and Necessity, which was an exercise in logical and rational thinking. Proponent of pragmatism, later defined by William James and John Dewey, holding that truth is measured by practical experience. What worked was true because it could be traced back to a law of nature. As inventor, he invented the lightning rod, bifocal lens. He was the man who negotiated the peace in 1783 with the English after the American Revolution, 1765-1783. He also was one who participated in drawing up the Declaration of Independence of the 13 colonies. So here's what the Americans celebrate on 4th of July. He was the founder of American Philosophical Society. He was the editor of the Poor Richard's Almanac. And if you ask me what was Poor Richard's Almanac, I will tell you that Poor Richard's Almanac was a collection of writings comprising advices for farmers. He also wrote autobiography to the beneficial of his son. Autobiography contains facts about Benjamin Franklin's life, about the way he organized everything since he got up until he went to bed. Most importantly was the fact that each day began with, "What good shall I do today?" Each day ended with the saying, "What good did I do today?" As a representative of the age of reason, he brought a rational approach to the world, but first of all, the belief in progress. So, the aim of our course, of our lesson, was, as a matter of fact, the American literature, the beginning of the literary production. Therefore, another question arises: what was the literary situation in the newly created United States? Philippe Renaud advised to authors written in 1788, advised his contemporaries with literary ambitions to turn to other trades. Why? Because it was not literature, obviously. And among the causes of the delay of the appearance, of the emergence of literary productions, were the social and political issues, lack of leisure, meaning free time, as well as the copyright law appeared in 1799. What did this copyright law tell? Okay. Well, this copyright law forbade for literary production to be published unless the author consent to this. True first American men of letter in America: Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, William Cullen Bryant, Edgar Allan Poe, all of them born after the American Revolution. Three of them, although gained international fame. Washington Irving was important because he wrote a history of New York from the beginning of the world to the end of Dutch dynasty by Dietrich Knickerbocker, which at first reads as a parody and afterwards it becomes original, humorous, fictitious account of life and matter in New Amsterdam. James Fenimore Cooper was the first man of letters. His first novel was a pallid imitation of Jane Austen's novel. Anyway, there is a joke which accounts for his beginning, for James Fenimore Cooper's beginning as a writer. It began as a challenge between him and his wife, because while he was reading to his wife, he said that there was nothing to be called literature, and therefore his wife challenged him, "Why don't you write something?" Well, that moment he began writing, and he wrote 32 novels and a dozen other works. Anyway, he was inspired by Walter Scott, and that is why he is known as an American historical writer. His most important and most popular novel is The Last of the Mohicans, and I'm sure you have read it. Another important writer, Edgar Allan Poe. Who was he? He was an American writer, widely admired in Europe. Nevertheless, his life reads like a Gothic novel. Edward Wigenknecht says in the study on Poe's work, while someone else remarked Poe's biography seems to be a tale invented by Poe himself. His existence, his life was not very happy, and that's why the critics say it is like a Gothic novel. Scully Bradley summed up best Edgar Allan Poe's contribution to the development of American letters. During a short life of poverty, anxiety, and fantastic tragedy, Poe achieved the establishment of a new symbolic poetry within the small compass of 48 poems, the formalization of the new short stories, the invention of the story of detection, read detective story, and the broadening of science fiction, the foundation of a new fiction of psychological analysis and symbolism, and the slow development in various stages of an important critical theory and the discipline of analytic criticism. So these are some of Poe's achievements. We have to bridge now the period between these two early important American writers, namely James Fenimore Cooper and Edgar Allan Poe, and the subsequent ones which I'm going to talk about. But between them, these important writers, there was this, let's say, the transcendentalist writers, Emerson, Thoreau, and Fuller, who wrote mainly essays in which they speak directly and clearly about what they believed and trusted. You can see that you have a task there to comment upon Thoreau's words, only that day dawns to which we are awake. So you can see that Thoreau said. So that's why you have to comment on this. One of the most important early American writers, Nathaniel Hawthorne, wrote stories and novels. Most important of them was the Skeleton Letter, important for us to study. And in that novel, you'll have to examine some themes which you'll find commented in the Spark Notes. And you also have a task there which you will deal with undoubtedly. And another task, it is about commenting on the last fragment of the novel. For doing so, you have to read thoroughly the fragment and say whatever you feel about it, taking into account the Puritan background. Another important writer of this period, Herman Melville, and we deal with Moby Dick, which is Melville's masterpiece. Although he became known only 30 years after his death. Anyway, Moby Dick is not a character because you cannot know what a whale may think. It is important that, at least I see it like this, Moby Dick embodies the absolute, which we are not allowed to pursue. Absolute, which is kind of God, because we don't know anything sure about God. And of course you have another fragment to comment upon, which is, as a matter of fact, the beginning of the novel, Moby Dick. And here we are at the third writer, Mark Twain, and his Huckleberry Finn. You have some themes there examined in Spark Notes also: racism, slavery, intellectual and moral education, hypocrisy and civilized world, guilt, shame, empathy. In conclusion, though they were not the first settlers, the arrival of the ship Mayflower in 1620 with 102 passengers on board is significant to the beginning of the United States of America. Second conclusion, the forefathers or pilgrims were Puritans who left England for fear of persecution of the English government. Succeeding in life has become the predominant feature of the American culture and literature all along. We cannot talk about American literature until James Fenimore Cooper. The first important American writers are Hawthorne, Melville, and Mark Twain. So, dear students, don't let schooling interfere with your education. Whatever it may seem to you, whatever it may mean to you, you may comment on it. And I have to tell you, I'm missing you, and I look forward to seeing you. Thank you.